I learned how small I had become in my own family the day my daughter-in-law told me I wasn't educated enough to stand in the picture. She didn't say it loudly. That's what made it hurt the most. Her voice was smooth, almost polite, like she was explaining a seating arrangement at a wedding. We were standing in the living room, the late afternoon light slanting through the curtains, dust floating in the air like tiny witnesses. The photographer was setting up his tripod, clicking and adjusting, while my son paced near the window with his phone pressed to his ear. She leaned toward me, her perfume sharp and floral, and said, "Maybe it would be better if you sat this one out. These photos are a bit formal, educational backgrounds and all, you understand." For a moment, I smiled because that's what I've always done when something doesn't make sense right away. I thought I had misheard her, or misunderstood. I was raised to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially family, but then she smiled back, tight, certain, final, and just like that I felt myself shrink, not because I didn't know who I was, but because she did, and she was ashamed of it. I stepped back without a word, my hands folding together the way they do when I'm trying to stay steady. The photographer cleared his throat awkwardly. Someone laughed too loudly. My son didn't turn around. That was the day I realized I hadn't been pushed out all at once. I had been erased slowly. Before all of that, my life was simple, not easy, but honest. I raised my son mostly on my own after his father passed when he was 9. We lived in a small house that always smelled faintly of detergent and boiled tea leaves. I worked with my hands, sewing, mending, taking in clothes from neighbors. I never went to college. I didn't have framed degrees on the wall or big words rolling easily off my tongue. But I knew how to stretch a meal, how to listen, how to stay when things got hard. My son used to say I was the smartest person he knew. He meant emotionally, I think, or practically. The kind of smart that keeps the lights on and the heart beating. When he married her, I tried to carry that same steadiness into welcoming her. She was polished, educated. The kind of woman who corrected your pronunciation gently but consistently. She worked in an office downtown, wore crisp blouses and shoes that clicked when she walked. She spoke about conferences and certifications the way some people talk about weather, casual, constant, unquestioned. At first, I admired her confidence. I thought maybe she would teach me things. I thought maybe we would learn from each other. The first birthday I noticed something was missing was my own. We used to celebrate quietly, just cake, tea, and my son teasing me about getting older. That year, there was a message instead. A short one, busy weekend, we'll make it up to you. They didn't. Holidays came next. Thanksgiving was suddenly just a small thing this year. Christmas dinner happened at her parents' house, which I heard about later through pictures posted online. In those photos, everyone wore matching sweaters. Everyone smiled, everyone belonged. I told myself it was normal. Families change, children grow up. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who clings too tightly, but each time I stepped aside, she stepped forward. At dinners I was invited to, she would gently correct me. "It's pronounced this way," or "Actually, that's outdated information." Sometimes she would laugh softly as if it were all harmless. My son would smile nervously, eyes flicking between us, saying nothing. Once I brought a dish to a gathering, something my son loved growing up. She tasted it and said, "Oh, this is traditional." Then she moved it to the end of the table, far from the center. I stopped bringing food after that. I stopped speaking unless spoken to. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen as someone worth including. The family portraits were meant to celebrate their 5th anniversary. She hired a professional photographer. She coordinated outfits, neutral colors, clean lines. Timeless, she called it. I wore my best blouse, ironed, simple. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual that day, smoothing my hair, telling myself I belonged there, that I was his mother, that no amount of schooling could erase that truth. And yet there I was being quietly asked to disappear. After she spoke to me, I moved to the kitchen. I pretended to busy myself with cups and saucers. My hands shook as I lined them up. I could hear laughter from the other room, instructions. Closer together, chin up. The camera shutter clicked again and again, capturing a version of the family I apparently didn't fit into. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was a heaviness in my chest, like something settling where warmth used to be. Later, when everyone had left, my son found me sitting at the table. "Mom," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "you know how she is. She didn't mean it like that." I looked at him, really looked. "She said I wasn't educated enough," I replied quietly. "How else is there to mean that?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, filling the space where an apology might have been. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment I had stepped back, every time I had swallowed my words. I wondered when loving my child had turned into making myself smaller for his comfort. And I wondered what kind of truth makes someone ashamed of the woman who raised the man they married. I didn't know then that the reason for her shame wasn't about my lack of education at all. It was about what I represented. And the secret she was afraid would come to light. After the photos, things didn't go back to normal, because by then, normal no longer existed. There was a stiffness in the air whenever I was around them, like furniture that had been rearranged without telling me. I kept bumping into sharp corners I hadn't learned yet. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Invitations arrived late or not at all. And when they did come, they were framed like favors, not family gestures. I told myself I was imagining it. Loneliness has a way of whispering lies when you let it sit too long, but the body knows before the mind admits it. I noticed it in the way my son avoided my eyes when his wife corrected me. In how she started introducing me not by name but by role. "This is my husband's mother," she'd say, smiling politely to friends, colleagues, people who nodded without curiosity. No name, just a title, functional, replaceable. Once at a dinner with her coworkers, someone asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, she laughed lightly and said, "Oh, she's very hands-on, old-school skills." Old school, like something charming but obsolete. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but I smiled anyway. I talked about sewing, about how I used to fix clothes when money was tight, about raising a child alone. The table grew quiet. Someone nodded respectfully. Someone else asked a follow-up question. She didn't like that. On the drive home, she was silent. My son stared out the window, jaw tight. Later that night, he called me. "Mom," he said, tired. "You don't need to share so much, it makes things awkward." "Awkward for who?" I asked gently. He exhaled. "For her." I closed my eyes. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about protecting me from embarrassment. It was about protecting her from association. From me. The slow exclusion continued, almost methodical. Birthdays were celebrated with trips I wasn't invited to. Holidays rotated between houses I didn't step into. When I asked about plans, the answers were vague. "We'll see. It's complicated this year. Next time for sure." Next time became a phrase with no meaning. I began marking time differently, not by events but by absences. The first holiday alone, the first missed milestone. The first time I saw photos online instead of memories in my hands. And yet whenever we did meet, she was polite, always polite. That was her shield. No raised voices. No cruelty that could be named easily, just small cuts delivered with precision and a smile. Once she visited me unannounced. She stood in my doorway, surveying my home like a guest in a museum, eyes flicking to the shelves, the furniture, the framed photos of my son as a child. "You've kept everything the same," she said. "I like it this way," I replied. She nodded. "It's nostalgic." That word again, as if my life were a phase people grow out of. She sat at my table, accepted tea, then cleared her throat. "We're hosting a dinner next week," she said. "It's mostly professional contacts, people from my work, important connections." I waited. She folded her hands. "I don't think it would be appropriate for you to come. Different worlds, you know." I looked at her, really looked this time. Her posture was perfect, her voice measured. She had practiced this. "And my son?" I asked. "He agrees," she said quickly. Too quickly. That was when something shifted inside me, not anger yet, something quieter, something heavier. Understanding. This wasn't about education, or class, or manners. This was about image, and I didn't fit the picture she was trying to frame. I started paying attention after that. Not to what she said, but to what she avoided. She never talked about her childhood in detail. She mentioned schools, achievements, awards, but not people, not parents, not places with emotion attached to them. When others asked where she was from, she gave polished answers. Clean ones. I noticed how tense she became when conversations drifted toward background, roots, family history, and I noticed how quickly she shut them down. Once, a neighbor asked if I had gone to university. "No," I answered simply. "Life took me a different way." The neighbor smiled warmly. "Some of the strongest people I know didn't go to college." She excused herself moments later. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That night I heard her arguing with my son on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but thin walls carry truth whether you want them to or not. She embarrasses me, she said. She doesn't know how things work, people judge. My son murmured something I couldn't make out. She doesn't belong in that world, she continued. And neither do her stories. Stories, as if my life were something to be edited out. I sat on my bed, hands clasped, staring at the floor. I thought of all the nights I had stayed up sewing to afford school supplies, of the meals stretched thin but warm, of the values I had tried to pass on, and I wondered what kind of world requires you to erase the person who gave you life or married the one who did. The breaking point came quietly. It was my grandson's birthday. I arrived with a wrapped gift carefully chosen. A book one my son had loved at the same age. I stood at the door longer than necessary, adjusting my scarf, practicing my smile. She opened the door, eyes flicking briefly to the gift. "Oh," she said, "you came?" "I was invited," I replied softly. She hesitated, then stepped aside. The party was already in full swing. Balloons, laughter, a banner with his name spelled in bold letters. I spotted my son across the room, holding a plate, talking to her parents. He saw me and then looked away. During the cake cutting, I stood near the back, clapping quietly. When it came time for photos, she organized everyone with efficiency. Parents, child, her parents, friends. I waited. She didn't call my name. Finally, I stepped forward slightly. "Should I?" She turned to me, smile fixed. "Maybe just this once. Let's keep it immediate family." The room seemed to tilt. "I am immediate family," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She leaned closer. "Please don't make a scene." That was when I understood she wasn't just ashamed of me. She was afraid of what my presence reminded her of. And I knew deep in my bones that shame that deep always hides a story, one that doesn't like the light. After my grandson's birthday, something inside me hardened, not into anger, but into clarity. I stopped asking questions I already knew the answers to. I stopped waiting by the phone on holidays. I stopped pretending not to notice the careful way my daughter-in-law curated her world, trimming away anything that didn't match the picture she wanted others to see. Instead, I began to watch. Not in a suspicious way, just quietly, the way you do when you finally accept that something is wrong and you're ready to understand it, even if the truth hurts. I noticed how she spoke differently around different people. With her colleagues, her voice lifted, vocabulary sharpened, laughter timed just right. With me, it softened into something condescending, like she was speaking to a child or a distant relative she felt obligated to tolerate. I noticed how she corrected my grandson when he repeated my phrases. "We don't say it like that," she'd say lightly. "Grandma's way is old-fashioned." Each time he looked confused. Each time something small was taken from him before he even knew it was his. One afternoon, I offered to pick him up from school. My son hesitated on the phone. "She thinks it's better if her mother does it," he said. "Why?" I asked, a pause, then, "It's just easier." Easier for who, I wondered. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. I stared at the steamless surface and thought about the word education, how she used it like a border, a fence, a reason. I wasn't ashamed of my lack of formal schooling. I never had been. But I was ashamed of how easily I had allowed myself to be treated as less than, and I started to ask myself something I hadn't dared to before. What was she hiding? The first real clue came by accident. I was cleaning out a drawer looking for a receipt when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Mrs. Harris?" the woman asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "My name is Ellen. I'm calling about the community center donation list." "You were listed as an emergency contact for," she paused, then said my daughter-in-law's name. I frowned. "Emergency contact for what?" "Oh," she said, surprised. "She volunteered here years ago. We're organizing an alumni fundraiser. We're trying to reconnect with former volunteers." I almost laughed. Volunteered. My daughter-in-law spoke about community work as something beneath her now, something she had outgrown. "I think you might have the wrong person," I said. "No," Ellen replied. "She put you down, said you knew her well." That surprised me enough to sit down. "She used to work with us when she was younger," Ellen continued warmly. "Before she went back to school, she was quiet back then, hardworking, had a different last name." A different last name. I felt a small stir of something, not suspicion yet, but curiosity. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time. Why would she list me as an emergency contact for something she never spoke about? Why would she hide a part of her past so completely? And why did that past seem to make her so uncomfortable around someone like me? I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I began piecing together small fragments. Old comments she had made and brushed aside, stories that didn't quite line up. The way she stiffened whenever someone mentioned scholarships or non-traditional paths. One evening, my son came by alone. He looked tired, older than his years. "She's under a lot of pressure," he said unprompted. "From what?" I asked. "From herself," he replied, rubbing his eyes. "She's worked hard to be where she is." "So have I," I said quietly. He nodded but didn't meet my gaze. I wanted to ask him if he knew, if he saw what she was doing, but I held back. Some realizations have to come from within. If I forced it, he'd only defend her harder. A week later, she called me herself. That alone was unusual. "I wanted to talk," she said, "about boundaries." The word landed heavily. "Okay," I replied. She arrived with her usual composure, sat straight, hands folded, eyes assessing. "I think it's best if you take a step back," she said gently. "From certain events, social situations, it's not personal." I almost smiled at that, almost. "You've built a life," she continued, "and I respect that, but we're in a different stage now, different circles." "Different class," I said softly, her jaw tightened. "Education matters," she replied. "People judge." "Yes," I said, "they do." There it was again, that fear, that need. I looked at her and saw for the first time not cruelty but desperation. "You're afraid," I said. She stiffened. "Of what?" "Of being seen," I replied. "For who you were." Her eyes flickered just for a second, then she stood. "This conversation is over." She left without another word, but she had given herself away. The truth didn't come to me all at once. It unfolded slowly, the way buried things do when the ground finally shifts. A neighbor mentioned recognizing her from years ago. A former classmate spoke of her in passing. A story surfaced about a scholarship, a second chance, a background she had worked hard to escape. And suddenly, it made sense. She hadn't always belonged to the world she now guarded so fiercely. She had climbed into it carefully, deliberately leaving parts of herself behind, parts that looked too much like me. And the closer I stood, the harder it was for her to pretend she had always been someone else. I realized then that my presence wasn't embarrassing because I lacked education. It was embarrassing because I reminded her of where she started. And she couldn't bear the thought of anyone connecting those dots, especially not in public. What she didn't know, what she never considered, was that the truth she was so desperate to hide had a way of finding its own voice. And soon she wouldn't be able to control the picture anymore. The truth has a way of pressing forward even when no one invites it. After that last conversation, my daughter-in-law avoided me completely. Not even polite distance this time, just silence. My son became the messenger, his voice careful whenever he called, as if he were stepping around glass. "Things are busy," he'd say. "She's stressed. Let's talk another time." Another time never came, but life has its own timing. The invitation arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between bills and flyers, thick paper, elegant font, a professional event and awards ceremony for her company. Recognition for leadership and community impact. My name was printed at the bottom, guest. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart beating slowly, heavily. She hadn't told me about it. That alone was strange. When I called my son, he sounded surprised. "She said she invited you." "Yes," I replied, a pause. "Then you should come." I could hear uncertainty in his voice, something else too, relief maybe, as if some part of him hoped this would resolve something he didn't know how to fix. I almost declined. The old instinct to step back to avoid discomfort rose up in me, but then I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller for the sake of peace, and I folded the invitation carefully and said yes. The night of the event, I wore the same blouse I'd worn to the family photos. Not because it was my only good one, but because I refused to treat this moment like a second chance to impress. I arrived early. The venue smelled of polished wood and wine. Soft music played, people clustered in groups, laughing easily, holding glasses that caught the light. She saw me almost immediately, her smile froze. She approached with controlled steps, eyes darting briefly around the room. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said under her breath. "You invited me," I replied calmly. "Yes, but," she stopped herself. "Never mind, just stay close to the back." There it was again, the managing, the hiding. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was done arguing. As the evening unfolded, speeches were given, achievements listed. Her name came up again and again. Applause followed. Cameras flashed. She stood on stage, confident and articulate, speaking about resilience, opportunity, and the importance of not forgetting where you come from. I felt something twist in my chest because she spoke those words beautifully. And because I knew how carefully she had erased the parts of her life that didn't fit the narrative. After her speech, people approached her with congratulations. Some drifted toward me, polite curiosity in their eyes. "And you are?" one woman asked. Before I could answer, she stepped in. "My husband's mother," she said quickly. "She helped with childcare." "Childcare?" I smiled gently. "I raised him," I said, "by myself." The woman's expression softened. "That's no small thing." She nodded, then moved on. My daughter-in-law's jaw tightened. The moment came later than I expected. A former colleague of hers, older, relaxed, clearly comfortable in his own skin, approached us. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said warmly. "And you must be—" He turned to me. I opened my mouth. "She's family," my daughter-in-law cut in sharply. He raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I know. But I meant, are you Mrs. Harris from the community center days?" The room seemed to quiet, though I knew it was only in my head. She went still. "I remember you," he continued, smiling at me. "You used to bring food for the volunteers. She talked about you back then, said you were one of the few people who believed in her." My breath caught. "Believed in her?" She stared at him, then at me, her face drained of color. "That was a long time ago," she said tightly. "Doesn't mean it didn't matter," he replied. He turned back to me. "She worked very hard to get where she is, but she didn't do it alone." There it was, the truth spoken gently, publicly, without accusation. People nearby listened now, not staring but noticing. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she didn't control the story. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak loudly. I simply stood there, present. Someone asked how I knew her. "I was there when she needed support," I said, "when life wasn't easy." That was all. She excused herself shortly after, her composure finally cracking. My son found me near the exit later, his face pale. "Mom," he said, "is it true?" I looked at him. "What part?" "That she came from that background, that she struggled." "Yes," I said. "It's true." He shook his head slowly. "She never told me." "No," I replied. "She was afraid." "Of what?" "Of being judged," I said, "the way she judged me." He swallowed hard. In that moment I felt no triumph. Only sadness for her, for him, for all the energy spent pretending. Because the shame she tried to place on me had never been mine to carry. And now others could see that too. The days after the event were quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not the tense quiet of avoidance, but the heavy stillness that follows a truth once it's been spoken aloud. Phones rang less. Messages came slower. When my son finally came to see me, he didn't bring explanations with him. He brought questions. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one where he used to do homework, and wrapped his hands around a mug of tea without drinking it. "I didn't know," he said, "about her past, about how she felt." "I know," I replied. He looked up at me then. "Why didn't you tell me?" I considered the question carefully. "Because it wasn't my story to tell," I said, "and because I kept hoping she would find the courage to tell it herself." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "She's been angry," he admitted. "Not at you, at herself." I let that sit between us. "She said you humiliated her," he added quietly. I met his eyes. "Did I say anything untrue?" He shook his head. "No." "Did I raise my voice, insult her, reveal anything she hadn't already lived?" "No," he said again. "Then the humiliation wasn't caused by me," I said. "It came from the distance between who she is and who she pretended to be." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "She pushed you away," he said. "I see that now." I didn't respond right away. "Some realizations need space." "I let her," he continued. "I thought keeping the peace meant asking you to understand." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Peace that requires one person to disappear isn't peace," I said gently. "It's surrender." His eyes filled just slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. I squeezed his hand once, then let go. Forgiveness, I had learned, doesn't always arrive with warmth. Sometimes it arrives with relief. She didn't contact me for a week. When she finally did, it was a message. Short, careful. "Can we talk?" I agreed. She came to my house again, but this time she didn't survey it. She sat down heavily, like someone who had been carrying something too long. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she began. I waited. "I was afraid," she said. "I worked hard to leave that life behind. People can be cruel when they think you don't belong." "I know," I said softly. She looked up, surprised. "I've lived that my whole life," I continued. The difference is I never tried to erase it. She swallowed. When people saw you, she said, I thought they'd see me differently. And when they didn't see me, I asked, what did that cost you? She didn't answer. I was never ashamed of you, she said finally. I was ashamed of myself. That was the closest she came to an apology. I accepted it not because it was complete, but because it was honest. Things didn't fix themselves overnight. She didn't suddenly invite me to everything. She didn't become warm or affectionate, but the sharp edges dulled. My name returned to conversations. My presence stopped being managed. At my grandson's next school event, she stood beside me instead of in front of me. It was a small thing, but small things are how healing begins. My son changed too. He spoke up when I was dismissed. He asked my opinion. He listened. Once, when someone made a comment about education at a gathering, he said calmly, intelligence doesn't always come with a degree. She said nothing, but she didn't contradict him. I don't pretend we became the kind of family you see in greeting cards. Life doesn't work that way. But we became honest, and honesty has its own quiet strength. I learned that night at the awards ceremony that dignity doesn't come from how others see you, but from how you stand when they try to make you small. I learned that shame grows in silence but withers in the light. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remain visible, exactly as you are. Healing doesn't arrive like a grand announcement. It comes quietly in ordinary moments when you least expect it. A few weeks after our conversation, my daughter-in-law called to ask if I could watch my grandson for an afternoon, not because her mother was unavailable, not because there was an emergency, just because she had a meeting and needed help. It might seem small, but I knew what it meant. She was choosing not to hide me. When she dropped him off, she lingered at the door. Her eyes moved around my home again, but this time they didn't scan with judgment. They paused. On the old sewing machine in the corner, on the framed photos of my son growing up, on the shelves filled with books I had collected slowly over the years. You kept everything, she said. Yes, I replied. It tells my story, she nodded. I used to think stories like that were something to escape. And now, I asked, she hesitated. Now I think they're something to survive. That was progress. At the school pickup, another mother struck up a conversation. She asked about my grandson's parents, their work, their achievements. I answered simply. When she asked what I did, I said, I raised a family and kept a home running. I still sew, I still help people. The woman smiled. That's a lot of work. Yes, I said. It is. My daughter-in-law stood beside me listening. She didn't correct me, she didn't interrupt. That silence felt like respect. Still, there were moments of tension. At a family gathering, someone joked about uneducated opinions. I felt my chest tighten, but before I could speak, my daughter-in-law did. Not knowing something doesn't mean you don't understand it, she said. Some wisdom isn't taught in classrooms. The room went quiet. I looked at her, surprised. She didn't look at me, but she didn't look away either. Later, she approached me quietly. I meant that. I know, I replied. Not everyone changed. Her parents remained distant, polite in a way that kept walls intact. Some of her colleagues still spoke to me like I was a curiosity. I stopped caring because something inside me had shifted. I no longer measured my worth by who included me or who didn't. I no longer bent myself to fit into spaces that demanded my silence. I took up space again. I joined a local sewing group. I volunteered at the community center. I shared my stories with people who listened, not because they felt obligated, but because they wanted to hear them. And in doing so, I remembered who I was before I let someone else define me. One evening, my daughter-in-law came over alone. I've been thinking, she said, sitting across from me, about how I treated you. I waited. I thought if I could control how people saw my family, I could control how they saw me, she continued. But it didn't work. No, I said gently, it never does. She looked tired. I was afraid that if people knew where I came from, they'd think I didn't deserve where I am. And now, I asked, now I see that pretending I came from nothing doesn't make me stronger, she said. It just makes me lonely. There it was, the truth she had been running from. I don't need you to be proud of me, she added, but I don't want to be ashamed of you either. I met her gaze. Then stop trying to rank people, I said. Life isn't a ladder. She nodded slowly. When the next family photo was taken, she didn't organize it. She let my grandson decide where everyone stood. He placed himself between me and his mother, grinning wide. No one moved him. No one asked me to step aside. The picture captured something different this time, not perfection, but honesty. And that was enough. Time has a way of revealing whether change is real or just regret wearing better clothes. In the months that followed, I watched my daughter-in-law carefully, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Apologies are easy. Consistency is not. She started inviting me without qualifiers, not as an obligation, not as an afterthought, but as part of the plan. "Can you come early?" she asked once. "I could use your help." Help, not supervision, not correction. At a holiday dinner, she introduced me by name. Said it clearly, with pride that didn't wobble. "This is Margaret," she told her friends. She raised my husband on her own. One of the women smiled at me. "That must have taken strength." "Yes," I said, "it did." She didn't interrupt. The real test came when discomfort returned. Her company hosted another event, smaller this time, less polished. I attended again, wearing a simple dress, standing comfortably in my skin. A man approached us, glanced at me, then asked her where I'd gone to school. The old version of her would have answered for me. This time she looked at him and said, "She didn't, and she's one of the smartest people I know." The man blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't mean—" "I know," she said calmly, "but it's an important distinction." She turned to me. "Would you like to tell him what you do?" I spoke about my work, about the skills I'd learned the hard way, about the people I'd helped. He listened. When he left, she exhaled slowly. "That was hard," she admitted. "Yes," I said. "Growth usually is. My son noticed too." "You're different with her," he said one evening as we washed dishes together. "Stronger." "I always was," I replied. "I just stopped hiding it." He smiled, then grew serious. "I wish I had protected you sooner." I set a plate on the rack. "I wish you had too," I said honestly. "But we can't rewrite the past, we can only decide how it shapes us." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "I'm trying to be better," he said. "That's all any of us can do," I replied. There were still moments when old habits surfaced. She sometimes over-explained things, sometimes corrected my phrasing without realizing it, but when I pointed it out, she listened. She apologized. She adjusted. That mattered. Respect isn't about perfection, it's about repair. One afternoon, she brought over a box. "I found these while cleaning," she said. Inside were old notebooks, certificates, photos from her early years, volunteer work, community events, the life she once tried to bury. "I thought maybe you'd like them," she said quietly. "You were part of that time." I ran my fingers over the worn edges. "You don't have to hide this," I said. "I know," she replied. "I'm tired of pretending it didn't exist." That was the moment I saw her clearly, not as my antagonist, but as a woman who had mistaken erasure for survival. And I felt something close to compassion. The family dynamic settled into something new, not perfect, not always easy, but honest. I was no longer pushed out of photos or conversations or decisions. My voice mattered again, and when it didn't, I spoke anyway, because silence had never protected me. It had only taught others how to dismiss me. I don't believe in neat endings. Life isn't a lesson wrapped in a bow, but I believe in dignity reclaimed. I believe in standing where you belong even when someone tries to move you aside. And I believe that the truth, spoken calmly and lived openly, has a power that shame can't survive. I used to believe that dignity was something you earned through sacrifice, through staying quiet, through enduring discomfort, through not making things harder for the people you love. I don't believe that anymore. Dignity, I learned, is something you protect. Not with raised voices or public accusations, but with presence, with truth, with the quiet refusal to disappear when someone decides you don't fit their picture. These days, when I look at the family photos hanging in my son's home, I notice something different. Not the clothes, not the smiles, but the way we stand. No one is positioned in front of anyone else. No one is tucked into the background. We stand shoulder to shoulder, imperfect, unfiltered, real. And when people visit and ask about me, my daughter-in-law doesn't hesitate. "This is Margaret," she says. "She's the backbone of this family." It still surprises me hearing those words. Not because I doubt them, but because I once believed I had to earn them by being smaller. I didn't. My relationship with her isn't warm in the way people expect reconciliation to be. We don't share secrets or shop together or call each other just to chat. But there is respect now, and respect, I've learned, is deeper than affection. She no longer measures people by the credentials they can list. She listens more, interrupts less. She asks questions instead of correcting answers, and when she slips, because we all do, she catches herself. That matters. I still sew, I still volunteer, I still live in the same home with the same furniture and the same memories pressed into the walls. But I carry myself differently now. When someone asks where I went to school, I answer plainly. When someone assumes less of me, I don't rush to prove them wrong, I let my actions speak. I take up space. And when I am not welcome somewhere, I no longer ask why. I simply choose where I am valued. If there is a lesson in my story, it isn't about in-laws or education or family photos. It's about what happens when we allow other people's shame to define our worth. Shame is loud when it's threatened. It demands silence from others so it can stay hidden. But the truth doesn't need permission to exist. And neither do you. To anyone listening who has been slowly pushed to the edge of their own family, who has been told in subtle ways that they are too much of something or not enough of something else, please hear this. You are not the problem, you were never the embarrassment. You were the mirror, and some people don't like what they see when they're reminded of where they came from. I didn't expose anyone, I didn't seek revenge. I simply stood still long enough for the truth to speak for itself, and in the end, that was enough. So I'll leave you with this question, one I wish I had asked myself sooner. How small have you made yourself just to keep someone else comfortable? If my story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have stepped back like I did, or would you have spoken sooner? And if you're finding strength in stories like this, consider subscribing. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest truths.